Yeah, next we'll hear from Angeli and her interlocutor. No? So Angeli Lacson teaches, as we all know, teaches writing and literature at UP Diliman. She released the zines Studies in the Present Tense and 2 volumes of Through Every Rupture, A Gleaming World, which are available at Tindahang Ruan. She lives in Quezon City with her 5 cats. Gabriel Gallardo is a researcher by profession and book hoarder at heart. Her poems and essays have been published in print and online, but her favorite mode of transmission is through anything ephemeral. You can read more of her work in zines and anthologies with her friends in their collaborative publishing effort, Shoestring Operations. Most recently, nasa BLTX. She is always in transit between 2 cities. So, yeah, let's welcome Angeli and Gabe.
Sorry, first time doing to. I'm first book ni Angeli, so we're very excited for this, but also very nervous. I'll let Angeli start.
Hello everyone. So Gabe and I and Paper Trails in general, we really wanted this to be a conversation between me and one of my most trusted readers. So Gabe has seen the progression of this from zine to essay to book length form from the very beginning of the year, which we'll talk about a bit more. So we just wanted to talk a bit about the process of writing it, and then open the floor to any questions that anyone may have. So let's kick it off, Gabe.
Okay. Sorry. Hello. So sorry for the nervous energy. And just a short, I guess, introduction about our relationship. Angeli and I go way back to UP Writers Club. She was, thank you to the members who are here alumni. Angeli was an applicant, I think, by the time I was on my first year. And we developed a friendship actually later than that time kasi yun applicant siya and I was an active, I think, at the time. And then when we became friends, I would send her, or we would send each other bad poems. But mostly it was me. So, you know, Angeli, as evidenced by this book, is a brilliant writer. So hindi naman sa one-sided, pero we nurtured each other's work, and I'm glad to see that at her launch today, that definitely you got my readers siya, and it was definitely a joy then to see the book progress to something like this today, and from which we are all kind of writers club. sorry. Okay, so I think we can start. So I wanted to structure this in terms of like a few formal training kasi creative writing. Pero I wanted to talk muna about how the project began actually. So Angeli mentioned that it started off as a zine, and then naging pretty an essay, and then after that this book length form. So can you tell us about, or can you trace sort of that progression? Did anything change, or what remained the same throughout all of that?
Thank you, Gabe, for the question. Sorry. It started off as a zine. I started writing in early January. So it's funny because with several friends, if I scroll up far enough, I still see the messages I sent them when I was writing the zine, and it just full of frustration and ranting about the process of writing and how difficult it was. But enjoyable in a torturous way. But it actually began a few years before this year in a way, in a sense that it's been floating around my head and floating around my writing drafts, writing dumps for a really long while. And actually it was my thesis year that gave me the opportunity to read widely and to read not just around themes of illness and disability, but just to read widely and whatever I wanted to read on. And those texts became foundational for the zine that I ended up writing. Probably the writing process was from January to March for that zine. After a while, I realized I wanted it memorialized in a bit more, somewhere not so, because it was a very small print run, just 10 copies, and we sold it to raise funds for RUA. So I started hunting down places that would want to publish it online. Initially, it was just, 5,000 words, 3,000 to 5,000 words. So Protein magazine picked it up. Right after they picked it up, like siguro 2 weeks after I got the acceptance email, Paper Trail had approached me thinking about wanting to expand it into a book length form. So eventually it worked out because I had no plans at that point of making it into a book, and that took really the latter half of the year. And the support talaga of so many people. So thank you to everyone in my acknowledgements, and thank you to everyone in my wider community who helped make this book possible, because definitely it wouldn't be here without so many people. So that was the general process of it, and it was quite organic, the way in which it went from zine to an online essay to a book, I suppose. Organic in the sense that it wasn't planned out, but definitely a lot of work in there.
That's actually really interesting because it seemed like the progression was so organic, as you say. And I'm actually curious about whether it was clear from the beginning, what you wanted to do with the project. So what you wanted to say, to do, or to convey with it. Was there always like that? Because sometimes writers have an idea of what they want to do when they start a book project, or in your case, it wasn't even the book project, which was at the front of your mind when you were started putting this together. So I just wanted to ask if you wanted to, if it was clear at least at the beginning what you wanted to do with the project.
When I started writing it back in January, things crystallized for me in the sense that I knew I wanted to write about several events surrounding my disability, and to sort of make sense of it. I also wanted to really sort of disturb the notion that disability and illness were just individual bodily things happening. And there's a really long tradition of that happening in literary writing. You can go back to Audre Lorde and the cancer journals, and Anne Boyer in The Undying, where they talk about not disability per se, but their experience of cancer within the larger scope of capitalism, etc. But one of the things I found out when I was doing research for my thesis was that we don't really have that same kind of literary writing tradition here in the Philippines. Usually when you find disability writings in the Philippines, they're very religious in bent, which is not bad. It was also just a glaring gap in the literature. So for me, I suppose, as someone who was working with and among people in the movement, I was also wondering about my own place as someone who was in a marginalized position, is in a marginalized position, but also has so many of these other privileges, right? And wondering too about the many people you meet on basic masses and integrations who, it turns out pala, like their experience is so resonant with disability, and they've had so many illnesses, and you can really see the wider scope in which their illnesses and their bodily malaise really takes form. So that was the initial prompting of the essay. With the book in particular, I wanted to expand the project a bit, in that I wanted to talk about how precisely because disability and illness are such ordinary things, they aren't deviating from the norm of healthiness and able-bodiedness. And it's something that can happen, that will all happen to us if we live in long enough, right? I hope we all live in long enough to experience the wonderful joy of aging and the wonderful pains of it, right? Because precisely it's such an ordinary event. There are so many pathways for solidarity, right? I was thinking around this time the strangeness that we don't really have a disability rights movement here in the Philippines. Not in the same way that you can point to a disability rights movement in the 70s in America, where it was really amazing that they occupied government buildings to see the enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Rights Act. And it's also been interesting to read literature around that movement and realize it was also so constrained to white people and what they wanted, and not a lot of intersectional demands happening in that movement. But anyway, the lack of a disability rights movement, I guess, was also an interesting point for me in that it really highlighted that we don't really have much organizing around explicit notions of illness and disability. And I don't know, I hope in my lifetime to see that movement rise and grow and change. Although I realize now, having talked to a lot more people, that it's so intertwined with the movements that we already have, and seeing like the role farmers and their fight against pesticides, for instance, play in our collective health and our collective struggle against corporate captured agriculture, right? Has really broadened my scope of what a disability rights movement can look like.
Okay, so that's definitely a lot of things that pop up in your book, and they were all really well discussed and well fleshed out. And I say this with the knowledge that you did start with the with disability and illness, right? So it's just really great to see how all the roots have they've sprung now in the discussion, the way that you were planting them in the book. And I was just wondering, like with all of these coming out, all of these related issues and concerns, how did you know when to stop? I mean, I know that it's always an ongoing project. You know, you will always be concerned with disability, with illness, with farmer and peasant movements, with all of these movements. So I just wanted, for the purposes of a book, I understand that it needs to stop. But how did you decide na ikaw mismo, that you set the limits of what the book would be about?
Well, there are actually several notes that didn't make it to the final final draft of the book. In part because I thought that they were sort of gesturing towards directions that weren't fully formed, or that I wasn't ready to fully form in general. I think also sometimes like you just have to live life a bit more, right? Before you're able to write something about your own experience, or even to write something about something you're experiencing. So it just felt done. And in that way, I also really credit people who were workshopping and reading my piece alongside the edits, who were also giving me, like, telling me whether or not parang it felt kulang, or it felt like it reached a natural endpoint. So in that sense, because at that point when I was finalizing that draft of the book, I was so close na to the project because I had been writing since January. I had no sense of distance anymore from the project. So it was super helpful to have a community of people who were working with me in the project, telling me na parang, okay, it's complete, it just needs to be reorganized, or it just needs a little more edits here and there. So in that sense, like, I think I mentioned acknowledgements that it really is others who make a book possible, and even if only one name appears on the cover page.
Okay, that's a really great sentiment actually. Kasi yun nga, a lot of what you touch on in your book is about community care. And it's interesting kasi if I remember, when we were in Writers Club, you were writing poems pa then. And I mean, not that you're not now, but like you're more actively writing, or you more actively wrote this book-length project. So, in terms of that transition from poetry, or I know there's poems din in the book, pero just how did that sort of influence any change in your, not change, but sorry, all over the place, nervous energy again. Pero I just wanted to know if like any influence on the structure of the book, like how did you organize the table of contents, for example, because it's organized, for those of you who have seen it, it's organized around definitions of what a note is, and there are those notes that fall under each of those, and there are repeating themes of what the notes definitions are. So I just wanted to ask actually, like structurally, first how did you organize the notes, and then how did you organize the table of contents?
Well, with regards to form, I definitely owe the form to Christina Sharp's Ordinary Notes. So that's a book that was released earlier this year. And actually, prior to reading her work, I was committed to making it like just a full-on run-on, but like the usual, quote-unquote, usual kind of essay. And so reading her work really broke open the possibilities of what was possible with the essay, and it was also interesting for me to realize, like, because my original title actually for the zine and for the project as a whole was Notes on Disability and Illness, and then to see how Christina Sharp used the note form, it felt like a sign. So I was definitely inspired by her and by other people who I was reading at the time. With regards to organizing in particular, I think we wanted to do something that was circular in a sense. So I hope there is a sense of circularity that when you're reading it, but it's still sort of undergirded by a common thread. So something that felt, I don't know, I feel like it's exciting to read something that brings you a lot of places, but still tries to bring you back to a common theme that you realize towards the end of the book. So in that sense, definitely the idea didn't come from me to organize it in terms of notes. And I'm really grateful to have read Christina Sharp and that she released her book early enough. So 2023, she released it 2023, I think in June. So wow, 6 months yung gap between her and me.
So on that note, kasi you did mention yan na she was working with notes then. So on that note, sorry. Anyway, I wanted to talk a lot more about the connective tissue amongst the themes that you have in your book. So you have those instances where you talk about CISA, and then you talk about Maria Clara, and then you talk about disability studies, and you talk about illness, and you also talk about care work and community care. So I was just wondering, syempre, as the orchestrator of the book project, you have it's not necessarily entirely clear to you what it is that you want to build with in terms of associations. Pero how did the associations come to you as you were writing? Or basically, how are you grading the work together? If, for example, sa graded essay, right, things like alternating, ganon. Pero for you, in structuring this book project, what associations were coming to you as you were constructing the book?
Well, it really helped to read a lot more on disability and illness theory. Partly, like what I said earlier, it was really my thesis year that gave me the opportunity to do that, and to realize how much it affects all of us, even if we don't personally identify as someone who's disabled or someone who's ill. Actually, the more if we identify as someone who's healthy or able-bodied, do these ideas of disability and illness affect us? In terms of associations, I think I was really just guided by the braidedness of it. Like you said about the braided essay, I was looking for sort of jumping off points from each note to another. So it went through a lot of reorganization. Initially, like the notes were all over the place, and at some point, I printed them all out and then had to scatter them and just see where things went. So there was a lot of experimentation that went into it, and a lot of trying to figure out and trusting what others said also about the entire structure and connective tissue of it.
Okay, tama na yung Miss Universe question. I just wanted to ask Angeli actually what she enjoyed the most about this whole process. Kasi this is her first book, so yay! Congrats on that. So, syempre, there are always moments of joy that keep us going as we go through these projects together with people that we trust. So I just wanted to give you the space to talk about what you like the most. Kasi most of what I've seen of you working with the book was the frantic 3 a.m. messages of like, can you read this draft? Ganon. So syempre there are joys to and that's not to say that that's not a joy in itself, but I just wanted to hear from Angeli what in particular kept her going as she was writing this project.
I really enjoyed the revision process. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I think the first draft for me is always the worst part of writing, when you're confronted with a blank page. I really, really hate that part. But when you have something na, and then when your focus is not only on expanding the analysis, but paying attention to the language that you're using, and paying attention to language in ways that, you want it to sound fun, you want it to sound not just like you. I mean, you want it to sound like you, but also you want to play with it a little. And so that attention to language is such a fun part of the revision process, sort of giving life to the sentence. And I hope that's something that comes off in the actual final copy of the book. But yeah, that was the most exciting part for me, like just playing around with how each sentence was structured, how each sentence sounded, and just revising on and on and on again. So if people didn't tell me to stop, I feel like I could just keep revising this book forever and ever and ever.
So dapat pala hindi notes yung title, parang work in progress. Yeah, so actually that's all the questions I have for Angeli now. If anyone would like to ask any, sorry, Lynn. If anyone wants to ask any questions to Angeli, raise your hand, the recitation job.
What's your favorite note, if you have one?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'm biased towards the Sisa and Maria Clara notes, just because that was a huge sort of fun thing to discover, and fun thing to suddenly realize that part of the project was rereading Nolly and El Fili. I think it was the first time I read it since high school, and even then, diba, high school you don't really read it. I don't really read it, so. And to read it with the consciousness of what I was looking for, and to realize, oh my God, it touched on so many things that I was looking for. So, and I am a lit major. I love my close reading, so it was such a joy to do a small sample of close reading for those notes.
Anyone who wants to ask a question, please approach us with the mic. Okay, I'll ask another question. So I asked Kanina what part you liked the most. What did you not like the most about this book writing project? I mean, I understand na meron talagang mga logistical concerns for a book writing project. Kunwari, parang like some ideas don't become realized at the end of the project. So, what did you? Trevor, this is preparation for your second book. No pressure. What sort of troubles, I guess, came up when you were coming up with the book? Parang na-aware kami, so that will be published with paper trails.
For me, it was figuring out what to exclude from the book, partly because all the notes felt so personal and so parang I was just too close to the project at that point, so it was good to have people tell me na parang, well, people didn't tell me like certain notes weren't needed, but for people to give general comments, and then for me to figure out that certain notes weren't built into the points that I wanted to build. So in a way, it was also good to have an idea of what I wanted to do from the very outset of the book, in the sense that it's what kept me grounded talaga throughout the entire writing and editing process.
On the note of literary influences, or like grounding them and the people around you, can you give us a reading list? From Bigla. I mean, syempre, it's we can see the traces then of the people that you have written about and the literary influences in your book. But do you have like a reading list that you could share to people? Because they want to read more literature like this. I understand that there are gaps talaga in Philippine literature with regard to illness and disability. Pero ikaw mismo, like what are your top books that you would say give parang alam mo yung related video dun sa YouTube, gano'n. Parang gano'n. Like, if you read Unbecoming, maybe you would like that.
Well, one book that really helped me throughout the project was Sonny Corones Bolton's Crypt Colony. So he's in America, and recent lang yung publication ng Crypt Colony in 2023 rin, if I remember correctly. And it really reframed the way I thought about disability and illness, particularly in the Philippines. So parang siya lang yung nakita kong first, I think, book that really talked about disability from a not policy perspective in the Philippines. So it is very academic reading, but I think the points he makes are super interesting and super engaging. And I think the way that he reframes reading disability, so he does a reading of Maria Clara that I credit in Unbecoming. He does a reading of Maria Clara in his book, Crypt Colony. The way that it's read, parang I think you can apply that framework to any kind of Philippine lit, and because it's not just the body, because it's also the language used to describe people who have been disabled or who have been ill, and sort of charting these histories of language, and seeing that these languages are still in use. It's just different sectors who are now being victimized by language. So those kinds of creative readings, I think, are super engaging, and I can't really offer a reading list, but if I had to offer one book, it would definitely be Cornelius Bolton's Crypt Colony.
Did everyone get that? Crypt Colony, tapos meron na tayong ordinary notes. There's a running list of influences for this book. And it's actually really interesting kasi the concept of writing through others is something that has been super generative for writers like Angeli, writers like myself did. And to see her book project come to fruition talaga, it's such a great moment. Guys, look at the book, it's so beautiful. Credits to Reggie De Gia, who's not here, for the cover. So, anyone have any other questions? Do you want to say anything? Sorry. Yes.
Yung favorite part ko dun sa nabasa ko, may question talaga ako, gusto kasi yung favorite, parang may isang part na tinatalakay din yung parang political economy ng able-bodiedness sa Pilipinas, sa particular ng galing. Pero yung tanong ko is, how did you choose what to exclude dun sa buong narrative niyo? Kasi nabanggit mo na kanina, you had a hard time, so what did you have in mind when you were choosing what to exclude?
Thank you. For me, it didn't feel fully developed na, and we were running against the deadline, so we had to get it finished siguro by before school started, so by early September. So I felt like if I couldn't commit to fully fleshing out a certain point that I wanted to make, parang I shouldn't half-bake it, right? And should just let it go muna. But right now, I don't feel bad naman about excluding it anymore. At first, I felt bad about it, but I think it's for the better kasi parang mas may space na ako to think about it more deeply. Who knows, maybe for another project in the future it could be used. So yeah, thank you.
So can we expect the sequel? Unbecoming. Sige guys, if you don't have any questions, we can go to comments. If you have, does anyone want to share their experience with either like if you've known Angeli before or I'm talking to her friends. I mean, if anyone wants to share any words of joy with Angeli about this whole event. Yes, Ika.
Actually, I'm really just here passing on the words that my parents told me to tell you tonight because I couldn't make it. Pero my mom wanted to say, and you know, I don't think my parents know Angeli very deeply, but my mom said that she's really proud of you. And then my dad, who is historically very resistant to political writing. He started reading it yesterday, or a few days ago, and every page he was flipping through it, and he said, "Wow, this is so powerful. This is really true, no?" And then after a while, like after saying like, "Okay, this is so good. This is so well written. This is really powerful." After every few pages, he would also say, "This is really leftist." But yeah, I think it stands. I'm really amazed at how you were able to get to my dad. So I think that's a good thing. And just from me, I've watched this project evolve since the beginning. I read the zine, I loved it, and it made me cry. And then I read the Protein Math version, and then having the honor to help workshop it, and then having the honor to actually read it now. I just want to say that I'm also really proud of you. I think you're a brilliant person. And congrats. Good luck.
I love you, Gita. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to say anything to Angeli? Yes, Ma'am Anna.
Hello, nakaliba ka kaya ano? I'll take this opportunity to speak. Like, share ko lang na, ayun, syempre medyo nabasa nga rin natin yung early drafts ng essay, tapos I couldn't stop raving about that essay din sa, it turns out parang kamag-anak pala ni Angeli, yung isang cousin-in-law ko, yung mga ganun. So parang nabasa mo na ba ito? Ganyan-ganyan. Tapos, so yung mga ganun lang na parang, kasi if you read something that you haven't really read, haven't read anything like it before, especially in this context, and it's overwhelming because it's just, again, the word brilliant has been thrown around, and that's true. But yun nga, it's just so awesome to see it, and to see the ways in which disability can be framed, kasi nga very limited yung the way it's been framed here. So, and yun, I just again want to thank Angeli kasi when I was doing the review for Crip Colony, parang sino pa ba nakabasa nito? Kasi kailangan ko ng thoughts, kailangan exchange thoughts with somebody. And I was so grateful because she had read it. So parang yun, exchange ng thoughts, at some point parang ni-google yung picture niya ni Sony Corazon Boltons, parang ay, pogi siya, mas lang nakaka-pressure. Mga ganun lang na parang, just to add levity to this process of understanding critical theory, but also how it applies to our lives, no? And then I just want to add na when I was reading the draft that was to be published, so aganda and everything, pero at the same time, at some point I had to like literally close my reader. Kasi parang, ay, harrowing. Kaya triggered na ako. pahinga muna ako, nanood muna ako anime. Yung mga ganun. So again, thank you so much for having I really have to throw around the word courage here because it's so difficult to write creative nonfiction and to like try to put into words things that are so personal and so sometimes even painful, but also at times intensely joyful. No? So thank you so much. Actually, that's really what I want to say. Thank you so much for writing this book.
Thank you, Ma'am Anna. Ma'am Anna was my teacher in CL 115, which is creative writing, creative non-fiction. So, hello. So she was my teacher in CL 115, which is creative non-fiction. So, no exaggerations that I wouldn't be here without her. Thank you.
So actually, I don't want to take up too much of the time now, but I just also wanted to say thank you to Angeli. There's this quote from Anne Boyer on dying. I really love that quote, and I wanted to use it for this moment. I just wanted to say thank you to Angeli for giving us a vocabulary for suffering and also a vocabulary for joy that we could use on this evening. So thank you.
Wala na, we have nothing else. Salamat, that was powerful. I also just, if I can share, I also just finished the book. I read it in one sitting, which is not advisable. It's incredible. It's powerful, it's urgent. Tapos yun, kung saan siya umaabot, pero interesting lahat. Mas brilliant lahat. So, please get a copy. So yun. Yeah, anything else? Of course, of course.
We don't want to embarrass our daughter. Yes, we can do it. First of all, thank you to everyone who has mentored her and supported her and encouraged her and cared for her all throughout this time. So very proud of Angeli. It's been a very long journey for us. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for caring for her. I think what struck me most, and believe me when she told us that she was writing this book, and when it came out, we were really blown away because, well, first I admit it's very different from the writing that we do, right? We're very dry writers. Husband also writes, right? The husband writes very differently also, but they do have one thing in common, I think, in my very humble opinion, because they write from the heart. And if you read her book, I think that's what comes out, that ultimately, she's asking people to care. She's asking us to build more bridges, build communities. And I think that's that type of message, that message is really worth spreading around. So thank you for everything that you helped her with, and we're just so very grateful, and of course very proud of you, honey. Thank you.
Ready to sign copies of the books. Thanks everyone.